Okay, I want to talk about developing auditing programs. First of all, I put the emphasis on things that can be directly observed, whether I visually observe it or it's something you do with a lab test, like for food safety. You know, record keeping. Oh, I worked in construction for 20 years on installing equipment. Well, we had more fake records than you ever can find. And I've gone through plant internal audits where I know they made them up. You know, they dairy cows with a 0% and 1% prod score. I don't believe that. You know, so let's just look at the implementation of a system that's been now used for over 10 years. That has worked. And it's worked based on what are the critical control points that are directly measurable. And you've got to get a passing score on all 5 of these. And if you don't get a passing score on all 5 of these, you fail, period. You know, there'd be no thing where you could not chill melons or not put chlorine on them and pass an audit. Boy, those are critical control points. That plant should have been delisted right there on the spot, not be getting an excellent score. So this gets into how do you weight it. I have found with the clients I've worked with, they want that stupid single number. I wish it wasn't that way, but that's what they want. Well, then you better have it so that if they don't chill the melons, it's like 50 points off, so it's going to be an automatic failure. Or if they're really terrible, they're going to get a minus score. You see, this is where, you know, I've done work on a lot of voluntary standards. And the AMI standard for slaughter plants, and I'm not going to use harvest facilities, I think that's BS. I can go out to Hollywood and I can call them slaughterhouses. And I'm not going to use, you know, gilding the lily, silly words like, you know, like a harvest facility. But you do certain bad things, you're just going to fail, period. And you've got to make those things be enough points off. And I've now worked with dairy cow committees for dairy cow things, chicken, okay, hens, pigs, and when you get on these committees, what I have found, I know this isn't very nice, the worst producers get on these committees to water down standards. That's not a nice thing to say, but that's happened. And the original AMI standard that I developed in 1997 after doing USDA baseline data, well, I'm going to be perfectly honest, it flew under the radar. It was Temple's little toy, and we actually got a strict standard. But other things coming out since then, I had a stupid conversation about 7 years ago or so with a pork board. Okay, we were making standards for how many skinny sows you could have on a farm. A body score of 1 is a half-dead sow. And they wanted to make it on their audit that you could have 10% half-dead sows and pass an audit. I go, wait a minute, I've been on a lot of places, I haven't been on a farm that bad. I don't know how a farm that bad could even be in business. I said, that's not an audit, that's a joke. Well, and I have to say in the previous speaker's talk about these FDA standards, I was sucking all that up, you know, really taking that in. Get control of the whole entire supply chain. Okay, I want to just go through how we implemented this auditing program. And in 1996, I did a survey for the USDA, and we measured these 5 things. And the thing is, 5 things I got on this slide. Percentage of animals stunned with 1 application of the stunner, percentage insensible, percentage mooing and vocalizing during handling, really good measure. It measures a multitude of sins. Electric prod use, falling down, slamming doors on them, squashing them in restraint devices. How many animals fall down anywhere in the facility? How many animals did you move with the electric prod? I can't believe how people try to game the system. Falling down, we define that as the body touches the ground. So then we get the stupid joker that has a pork plant, and he tried to say, well, the pig didn't fall down because the ham touched the ground and the ham is not body. I get really sick and tired of this round and round BS. But the thing that was good about this is it's very clear, just like traffic rules. And what we did is to pass for beef, you had to get 95% of the animals dead with a single shot from the stunner. And that's where the top 25% of the plants could do it on initial baseline data. Insensible, man, you don't cut up anything until you get it dead. That's 100%. How many animals vocalizing? Okay, to pass the McDonald's audit or Wendy's audit, only 3. You're allowed 3. 3 animals mooing up there in the stunning area. And I just read a brand new paper by Bourquet in the Journal of Meat Science. They had a really bad plant over in France. They had 25% of them vocalizing. On my original baseline data, we had 35% of the cattle vocalizing because they took Holstein dairy cows, tried to cram them in a chute designed for little short Herefords. That didn't work. Falling, it's 1%. That's everywhere in the facility. 1%. No more than 1% can fall. Electric prod use, if you want to get an excellent score, you've got to get it down to 5%. That's 25% of the animals for a passing score. But you see, they had to make certain numbers. Boy, and when we started implementing this, boy, did the plants scream, big fit. And I was on these initial audits. The first year that we implemented this, I went to 26 plants with the McDonald's people and the Wendy's people were right up there too, getting these exit meetings. They were complaining that they couldn't do it, but there were a few plants that did it. And I said, well, your sister plant down the road's doing it just fine. And the good news is we were able to get almost all the plants into good compliance without spending a fortune. There were 75 plants on that original supplier list. Only 3 had to build expensive things. And 3 had to have the plant manager removed because nothing changed until the plant manager was removed. And we were able to fix the plants with simple things. Non-slip flooring at the unloading ramp and in the stun boxes, lights, adding lights, moving lights, because cattle are afraid of reflections or the dark, put up a solid panel so they didn't see a conveyor moving by, just very, very simple things. Training people, but it was simple. It was very, very simple. It's yes-no scoring. Did it moo? Yes or no. I don't want to count the moos. I don't want to get into how loud it mooed, because I've a PAACO trainer, and you know, it's really, really simple. It's per animal. If it either fell or it did not fall, I'd either touch it with the electrical device or I didn't. I can't tell if you push the button. So if you touch it with a prod, I count it. It's gotta be simple. That's how you get what's called inter-observer reliability. And I noticed up on one of the previous slides about variability of enforcement. You know, the latest USDA directive on humane slaughter is, the USDA is really trying to do a good job on this. And we still have things like minimize agitation and excitement. I don't know what that means. Minimum electric prod use, I don't know what that means. You know, one person's idea of minimum might be very different from somebody else's idea of minimum. And the other thing is, we score 100 animals. It's based on direct observation. It's not a paperwork audit. And I get really fed up with everything turning into a paperwork audit. I'm glad to see that the other auditing programs are now going 60-40, where 60% is out in the plant. And the other thing is, I really pound into auditors, writing good comments. That's really important. Okay, the principle is, you've got to figure out what are good outcome measures. What are the measures that detect multiple problems? Then there's some things, well, like not chilling melons. Well, then you better measure how cold the water is. Well, you need to just fail. You know, there's certain things you just got to do on an engineering standard. You just have to do it. But falling can be caused by either a slippery floor or poor handling. It's an outcome variable. Now, of course, outcome variables of food safety would be things like, you know, microbacteria and microbiology lab tests. Those are outcome measures. Vocalization can be caused by a bunch of different things. You see, you can't measure 100 things in a place. That's going to make you go crazy. You got to figure out what are the really important things you either got to have or not have, and what are some of the good measurements. I would say they're doing swab tests, and then you got to figure out how many swab tests you got to do on how many different places to, you know, to get a reasonable confidence that you're going to catch a problem. Because you got to have something that I can train somebody to do in a day-and-a-half workshop. That's the reality. And for PAACO training, we do 2 plants during the PAACO training, and then they got to do 3 more plants with an experienced auditor. Because as some of these auditing programs have expanded, we've gotten into some very bad problems, like with a chicken auditor doing a beef plant. Is just going into a beef plant. Never even been in a beef plant before? No, that's not okay. And he was doing a food safety audit in there too. It's not okay. No, they got to go to 5 places with an experienced person. Then we have things that are automatic failures, dragging non-ambulatory animals. And then people try to say, well, if I push them with the bobcat loader, that's not dragging. So I go, yeah, okay, scooting, that also is going to count. Beating up animals, poking sensitive areas, deliberately driving animals on top of other animals. And I say deliberate, because sometimes they'll jump on each other and I can't stop that. And deliberate slamming of gates on animals, where it's done on purpose. See, there's some things there where you've got to put the purpose in there. Also, we have there written in there that the acts of abuse are not limited to this list. I can't figure out every perversion somebody might do and list it, like putting cigarettes out on them or some other, really bad thing like that. And then there are some practices that are prohibited on the American Meat Institute guideline. According to the industry guidelines, shackling and hoisting of dragging of conscious animals for religious slaughter, the industry guideline bans that. The Humane Slaughter Act has an exemption for that. Things like trip floor boxes, some of the places that were doing shackling and hoisting for religious slaughter did have that. That's really hideous. Run them in there. You have a hydraulic thing that jerks the floor up, that throws the cow down. Really nasty. You get a 100% falling score. So that's going to be an automatic failure. Any equipment that is designed to make animals fall down. The thing is, you got to get good measures to detect multiple problems, because I got to have an audit that doesn't take a week to do. The Europeans right now have the European Animal Welfare Quality Audit, and it's got some good things in it for farm audits, but it's so complicated. It's too difficult to train people on it. You got to have something where you can do it in a half a day, roughly, because McDonald's and other companies, they send a food safety auditor in there, does both the welfare audit and the food safety audit. 1 day per plant. You've got to have something where you got some reasonable use of the people. I mean, the thing about Baxter, that was definitely going for the lowest cost. But we got to keep costs reasonable. We can't have things where costs are just totally through the roof. Another thing that I find in talking about these things is there's a difference between a commercial auditing system and methods that are used for scientific research. You might be doing a lot more samples, let's say, for scientific study. And commercial systems, you've got to have something that's simple and practical. Because if it's not simple and practical, I can't train them to do it. I still have a zillion questions about per animal. We'll be out there in the plant, and I'll explain to him he's either silent or he moves. So the cow moves 4 times. Is that 4 points off or 1 point off? It's 1 point off, unless an act of abuse was involved, making them move. Now these are the scores that a beef plant has to make in order to, to pass the audit. And the thing is, they got to get a passing score on all 5 of the things. And there's more than 5 on there because, a plant may have a head holder or not have a head holder. But you can't get in a situation where you fail on falling, but then you got enough points on paperwork and everything else that you can pass. And there needs to be certain things where, the thing for melons, maybe the chlorine and the chilling, you don't have those things, you fail, period. You just fail. You call up and you delist them right then and there. And this is the scores that you have to do for pigs for correct electrical stunner placement. The thing I like about this is it's like traffic rules. Traffic rules, when you think about it, as you travel all around, yeah, there's some differences in how the police are going to enforce them, but for the most part, they work pretty darn well. Okay, what we did is I had a USDA survey. I collected baseline, and the thing that I'm finding now, while I've been on these committees, is the bad producers get in there and they want to make an audit that the worst place can pass. And this has happened with every single species. You've got to have standards. I think we got to look at standards, and I really like the thing they were saying about the JBS plant where they put the people that are skinning out legs, which is a very critical food safety procedure. I got pictures of the kids up there in their workstation, because if they skin out that leg badly, their kids could get sick. I think we have to look at everything that we do and say, well, how would you like it if your wedding guests looked at this? Could you defend this to the public? Could I stand up at a Barnes & Noble in New York and defend this? Let me tell you something really disgusting I saw, and it was within the last year and a half. I went to turkey plant. And I went in there, look at some handling stuff, look at a bunch of stuff, and I was real happy. Then we had to go back out there to look at some stuff, and I don't think they planned on having me see the heavy manufacturing toms. Hideous doesn't begin to describe these toms. They were really big, they were full of breast blisters. Okay, I can cut those off. But the thing that was really bad is that on about 5 of these toms, and I was there for maybe 5 minutes, the whole drumstick was gangrenous black. Ugh. Boy, I'd never seen anything like this in a chicken. And it was going down a line into the manufacturing meat. That tom should have gone in a garbage can. How could you defend that? No, they cut that disgusting drum off, and then the rest of the meat went into whatever their turkey ham or whatever. I'm like, oh. And I don't care if that's, even if it's microbiology safe. And I found out that what happened is that the turkeys are growing so fast that their tendons were snapping, and the whole drum had gone necrotic. I'm going, this is sick. No, that's not okay. That's, yeah, how can you imagine trying to sell that to your family? Would you want to feed that to your family? Okay, let's look at some of the things they've learned in 10 years of doing this. I've gotten data from 10 major restaurant companies, from 2 major restaurant companies. Beef line speeds from 45 to 390 an hour, pork from 50 an hour to 1,000 an hour, so we got a nice mixture of different kinds of plants there. And things have improved a lot. When I originally collected the baseline data, only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% of the cattle on the first shot. You know why they couldn't do it? They failed to maintain the equipment. They failed to maintain the stunner. They just let them break. I'd go into plants and they'd have 4 busted guns. This is back in the bad old days, early 90s, when I was working on installing center track restrainers. Boy, and they could really tear up equipment too. You know, now people have to maintain stuff. And this has gotten a whole lot better. Yep, and a person would be standing over the clipboard and collecting data. Okay, let's look at some other things. Let's look at insensibility. That's gotten a whole lot better over the years. The USDA has been getting a lot more strict. You know, here we can measure improvements here. Boy, I can tell you, back in the bad old days, it was bad. And how about vocalization? You know, percentage of plants where 3% or less of the cattle vocalized. They could pass the vocalization audit. That's gotten a whole lot better. And even the kosher plants, the ones that have got decent restrainer equipment, you know, they're passing it now. And then how about electric prod use? They could, you know, stay within that standard. That has improved. And then there's some people that say, well, maybe we ought to just ban electric prods. No, because you get an animal every once in a while that absolutely will not go. I've seen people break the tails off, stick something up the butt. But one thing that most of the plants are doing now is they've banned people carrying the prod around all the time. Can't carry it around all the time. Plants have come up with some interesting alternatives, like stiff scrub brush. That works really well for getting the pigs to go up the chute. A vibrating prod. That doesn't totally replace the electric prod, but it replaces it a good deal of the time. And then how about falling down? We didn't, for some reason, didn't collect falling data in the year 2000. I don't know why, but you know, that's gotten better. The thing I found on falling data is the plant either has a great big problem or they just don't have a problem. We've learned some things over the years. And when we first started, there was no difference between announced and unannounced audits. People did all kinds of bad stuff in front of you because they didn't know any better. Hell, then what we ended up finding out is then people did know better, and then they learned how to act good when you were there with the clipboard. And what we found is stunning didn't change. Stunning was so dependent on equipment. And plants now had dedicated maintenance programs. They had test equipment to test the gun to make sure it was hitting hard enough. And the video auditing, some interesting things learned on that, is that the electric prod use, electric prods came back out when they didn't know the cameras were turned on yet. You know, they'd start using electric prods a whole bunch more. Stunning just didn't seem to change. Another thing that was found when the video auditing came out is some of the plants had falsified their internal records. They didn't match the video audit records. Now, to make it more positive, what some of the companies have done, I've heard Mike Siemens talk, that he's done at various meetings, is every Cargill plant gets the data every week, And then the plant that has the best scores gets a pizza party maybe once a month. So you're making it into something positive, which I think is really, really a good thing. Okay, let's look at the pork plants. Well, again, the stunner getting placed correctly, gotten a whole lot better. A lot of this is management. The other thing you can't do is there's no way you can run 1,200 pigs an hour on one restrainer and get the stunner on right. It just doesn't work. And this brings up another thing. You understaff and overwork. Another thing I've seen, you get the line going too fast and the guy's not going to sterilize the knife. That's the first step they drop out. And the thing I have found about workers messing up on the line on any kind of really precision procedure, you can up the speed, up the speed, up the speed, and then they go, it crashes. It's like breaking a bridge. They just can't do all the motions until they'll leave out a step. Usually going to be the sterilizer step. And some of the early data that AeroSite collected on sterilizer usage baseline, it was bad. It was bad. It was like 20%. Now it's way, way up. You know what? They did the same thing in hospitals on hand washing. It was bad. Bad. It was like 20%. And then they got it way, way up to like 95%. Okay, insensibility over the years. That's improved. And then this is 5% of the pigs moving electric product to stunner entrance. We had some missing data there, unfortunately. Okay, we did find that there was some difference in handling facility type. Some of the plants now have these new CO2 units where they can handle the pigs in a group, and it's very easy to get the, almost completely get rid of the electric prods. In other words, some plants got rid of them completely, but there's other plants that still use them quite a bit, because some plants were at 100%. And pigs falling down, that stayed pretty constant. Okay, the thing is, making a system that works, there are some cost constraints. I mean, we've got to have something that doesn't cost $1 million. The same auditor's got to go in there and do welfare and do the food safety audit. It's got to be done in a day, and I got a day-and-a-half workshop to train them in. That's the reality. Typical auditor that on the welfare audits, bachelor's degree. You see, and I originally did this presentation, I was doing it to scientists. And one of the things that's been a problem with academic scientists is they lots of times don't bridge the gap very well between the academic world and the practical world. And something that we got to use in the practical world, we have to simplify it. It's just that simple. And we found that the slaughter plants, they can easily do this course. And then people say, well, can't you just make it more strict? Well, on the stunning score, probably not. The plants, and you average them all up, they're running right around 97, 98% beef stunning. Okay, tripods have 3 legs. Let's get into what we have to make sure everybody's doing their job. I tell my corporate clients, and I work a lot with corporate clients, well, we can't just put it all in the third-party basket. You have got to get out there and do some spot audits to make sure that the third-party auditing company is doing their job. And then you have to do internal audits. There's 3 legs on the tripod, which of course that really bad peanut factory place didn't have that. Big companies actually had delisted them. But the cracker companies got burnt on that because they didn't do any corporate audits. I really pound this into people. You've got to be, have more than one check. Now, if you got 75 plants on the approved supplier list and you have them all done by a third-party auditor, that doesn't mean corporate's got to go out there and do 75 audits. No. But you need to check out probably 6 or 7 of them. The other thing I've noticed happens, certain plants are geographically off the beaten path. They're just difficult to get to. You can't fly a plane somewhere and rent a car and do 2 or 3 plants. You fly like 3 different planes and rent a car, and it's a real pain in the butt to get to this place, and it gets left out. And that plant might be one. And one plant I went to one time that was in that category, hideously disgusting, didn't begin to describe this plant. They had half-dead beef and dairy cows there that had been dipped in liquid, and I call them the half-dead fudgicles. And I remember getting into the office with the plant manager and going, You know, how would you like to feed this to your grandchildren? I mean, it was just disgusting. And this plant was a real pain in the butt to get to geographically. You know, so we're going to have to look at some of those things too. And even when we did the original McDonald's audits, I know 2 plants, and they actually were decent plants, we never went to, simply because they were too difficult to get to. That's not a good thing, but that's just part of the reality of, you know, what's going on. Okay, the other thing about numerical scoring is nice is you can track progress. Okay, air. If air blows into the faces of the animals as they come up the chute, they won't go in. I know you don't want all the cattle germs going in on the kill floor, but on the other hand, if I blast the air out the door of the stun box, they will not go in. I'll have to burn them up with electric prods because they just won't go. You know, this is where there's sort of a conflict a little bit here. So what you have to do is you got to balance the airflow. So where at the stun box door it doesn't move. And the amount of animals balking and electric prod use was reduced when I got rid of the air blowing in their face. And this shows how I made simple corrections in equipment, like installing a light on a restrainer entrance that was too dark. And I had 8% of the cattle mooing, I dropped it down to 0, just with a light duct taped on an entrance. Another problem is the center track restrainers up off the floor. There's a 7-foot drop under there. So you've got to put a false floor in there so they don't see the 7-foot drop. And then somebody at the plant goes, well, I don't want to clean all that extra metal. So they take it off, and then it doesn't work. And if you see the HBO movie, there's a scene in there where my nice non-slip ramp gets metal put over it. And that actually happened. And the center track restrainer has the exact same ramp design, just like the dip vat in the movie. And I got plants cutting cleats off, cutting the ramps off. I had one plant where their light on the restrainer entrance broke. Well, instead of fixing the light, they went and messed up my ramp. And they did a whole bunch of like welding that looked like pigeon doo-doo in there that took somebody a whole weekend to do. You know, they kind of don't see it. And then this other plant here had a thing that really squashed the cattle's neck really tight. I reduced the pressure, went from 23% down to 0 mooing. And here's putting a light on the entrance of a restrainer to reduce the amount of prodding. Now, of course, in this situation, I've got handlers that only prod the pig that won't go. You know, back in the bad old days, they just had the automatic prod reflex. We just zap everything, you know, 3 or 4 times. You know, we went from 38% having to be prodded down to 4. We could track progress really, really, really nicely. Really like that. There's an example of the light. It's really nice and simple. But the problems I'm running into now are the hard-to-handle animals. We've got some bad problems with pigs. Pig weights have gone up. There are some farms where they might have 20 downers on one truck, 20 non-ambulatory pigs. The pigs are so weak they can't walk from the truck to the stunner. And the plant was going, oh, we're going to replace electric stunning with CO2, that will fix it. I go, no, it's not going to fix it. The pigs can't even walk across the yards to get to the stunner. It's not going to fix it at all. And, you know, it's heavier weights, going like from 250 up to 275. You know, too many beta agonists, like, you know, like ractopamine. You gotta give me an animal that I can handle. Nothing's worse than pigs where nobody's walked in their pens, because a pig differentiates in a man in the alley and a man in their pens. And if you don't get the pigs used to having you walk through them, they're crazy when they get to the plant. They're just impossible to handle. And you're going to have food safety, meat quality issues. Now, there's some interesting things being done now with more things we can do with lab tests and ones that we can do right in the plant. My student Lily Edwards, who's going to become animal welfare specialist for JBS, her thesis was on measuring blood lactate at the bleeding area, and the pigs that jam in the chute, back up, and get prodded have higher lactates. So you might be able to use that as an objective handling measure. We also want to work on some things with glucose measurements. Now you see a long-term stress. Let's say there's fried with prods back at the farm, lactate will be down. But in that last 5 minutes, going up that chute, I can measure lactates, and they're going to be raised up. I just found another journal article for measuring efficacy of CO2 stunning, measuring blood oxygen levels. I want to look into that one a lot further. But I like these things that are really objective, because there's a lot of hassles with USDA on whether or not an animal's insensible. Unfortunately, the training has something to be desired on training the inspectors on how they determine insensibility. You've still got inspectors shutting the plant down because pigs' feet are kicking. Well, you can take the head off, and the feet are still going to be kicking. You know, so I like these things that are a lot more objective. And, okay, what are the things that a plant had to do to pass an audit? Training and supervision of employees. Now, this, again, is not very nice, but we found there were certain employees that had to be removed. Every time the back was turned, the prods were out, and they liked to hurt them, and it was roughly 10%. And we found this out both after the video auditing and after just the regular, just the pen and paper auditing. We had to put a non-slip floor in every single beef stun box, you know, steel rods. Now, of course, I had a conflict of interest being in the equipment business, so I did everything I could to make whatever the plant had work, and I do not have a conflict of interest with steel rods. And it was amazing how welding a few steel rods on the floor or putting in a woven tire mat at an unloading ramp would improve things. Solid sides to block seeing certain distractions, you know, especially outer perimeters. You got trucks going by, you got to block that up. You got a sunbeam coming in, and the cattle can see the sunbeam, and it's right at the entrance of the chute. You got to get rid of the sunbeam. Or your chute's outside and it's really sunny, then it's dark in the plant, they won't go in. So then you got to build a little roof over the chute. These are not super expensive things. Adding and moving lights. Adding lights to light up dark chutes, moving lights to get rid of reflections, and only 3 plants had to buy expensive stuff. Things that made it successful was very objective. I was right there next to the plant manager. He was scoring it too, and I said, just didn't make the numbers. You know, when we first started. You know, it wasn't that I thought the plant was good or bad. They simply didn't make the numbers. And the cutoff points were put where the top 25% could pass. And it's just turned out that we really can't make them that much more strict. No, the other thing, we gotta have normal plant operation. Boy, people started to get faking good. They'd do stuff like slowing the line down, all this kind of BS like this. You gotta have normal plant operation. It's gotta run at the speed it's supposed to be running at. They can't just be doing a show. You know, then I see somebody out there with a radio on him and a different colored hat, and he is pushing cattle up the chute. I know that's not the normal employee. The thing that's stupid about it is he lots of times is worse than the normal employee. They'd be better off if they just let the normal employee do it. But you know, every way to fake through the audit, let the line run out. No, you got to keep the line full. You got to run the line at the regular speed, and you got to keep the line full because I got to see normal plant operation. But then on the other hand, the auditor has to make sure they don't stand in the wrong place, make all the cattle balk. You see, normal plant operation goes both ways. Has to be fair. And when I do PAACO training, I really emphasize this. And it's a two-sided thing because an auditor can really mess up the cattle handling. That's my website. I got lots of information on that. I also have another book that's not here. It's called Improving Animal Welfare, a Practical Approach. And it's a scientific book on how to set up animal welfare auditing programs. It has a lot of stuff in there on how to set things up on the farm. Because again, on the farm, what are the critical control points on dairy? How about skinny cows? How about how many lame cows? Now again, we've had some problems with watering standards down, where you know, the cows that get lame are the lactating cows. So you don't put your lameness score across every calf and stuff in the dairy. It's got to be on lactating cows. Okay, and I've just, you know, called people on the, you know, people said, well, no, it's got to be, it should be 5% of your lactating cows. What are the important things? How could I have good welfare to dairy if 10% of my cows had swollen legs with lumps on them that big? Somebody needs to fail an audit for that. It's just that simple. Well, I think I'll end it there, and hopefully you got some questions. And I do have a couple of flyers on this book.
Thank you, Tim.
And I unfortunately do have to leave at 2, but my plane is at 4:20, and I would like to make it.
I had a question. I've reviewed a couple of audits from other countries, and I know that you have done some work in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, Australia is pretty much following the same thing.
Yeah, I've seen their audits following the AMI standard.
Yeah.
There are large discrepancies between the scores and the numbers between domestic and Australian and New Zealand. do you have any ideas as to why their numbers are so much higher for vocalization and
Why the Australians are higher for vocalization? Well, they need to get it fixed. And I've been down to Australia, and most of those plants down there are perfectly capable of getting decent vocalization scores. I've been in big plants and I've been in little plants, and they shouldn't be higher. There's no reason why they should be higher. I've been in plants in New Zealand, and those plants, I've been in a bunch of them. They are very capable of getting a 3% vocalization score. You know, that's somebody watering down standards if they're passing. What kind of scores were they getting?
very rarely do I see numbers for domestic scores, but then for Australia, New Zealand, I'll sometimes see like prod use at 23%.
23% passes on prod use.
Right.
Yeah.
But I rarely see that for anything domestic. So I just wonder if there's a difference in the
Well,
cattle
you
or
mean
prod
domestic
use.
in Australia?
Yeah.
Well, most of the auditing that's been done and that I've had anything to do with in Australia and New Zealand has been for export, because it would be for one of the companies here that's, you know, exporting meat, and so that would be our requirements. But I've looked at some European data that was presented at the Humane Slaughter meeting this summer over in England, and some of the European plants are terrible, and they don't realize how terrible they are because they've never. For some reason in Europe, they seem to be resistant to the idea of the numerical scoring. And this paper that's in Meat Science, they had a 25% vocalization score because the restrainer was squashing the cattle too hard, and then to get the cattle into the restrainer, they looked right out onto the floor with all the workers there. They're not going to go in. You see, you manage the things that you measure. These plants are really rotten falling scores. And in most cases, that's easy to fix. I can usually fix the vocalization. What I would do with that plant in France, I'd get you go down, you get some big cardboard, I'd get a big sheet of plywood, and I'd put that, like this far in front of the box, because her head went out through the front of the box, and then put a light up there, and that would probably fix that, and then they'd have to replace it with something more permanent. I'm amazed at the plants I can fix with pieces of cardboard, duct tape, and portable lights. It's just amazing. You control what they see. But a 25% vocalization score, that's atrocious.
Other questions?
I'm going to pick somebody. Well, the other thing I want to talk about, too, and I mentioned earlier, is this whole thing about boundaries of audits. We've gone round and round and round at some of the training sessions about boundaries. And there's certain industry people that get in there and say, well, if it's not on the audit tool itself, in other words, an auditing company should only audit according to the published audit tool. And if it's not on the audit tool, then they got no business putting it in the audit. Well, what if the audit tool doesn't have anything about chilling melons? Yeah, that's right. I've always thought that was BS having that. What if I drove into a plant and they were poking the eyes out of cattle and I could see it as I drove in? Well, there's certain people in the industry who say that shouldn't count. That's outside the boundaries of the audit. And I'm the one who's just fighting that, and it just gets ridiculous. They say, well, that's not on the audit. And I say, I can write it in the comments, but then the score has to be passing. But third-party audit's taking a giant hit in the Denver Post, and we're not going to have any credibility if we go around that kind of nonsense. One of the big problems is the industry. There's certain people in the industry that really live in their own hole. They don't have any contact with the general public. I mean, I got to think, could I stand up at Barnes & Noble and defend this? What if the New York Times called me up? I think if I can't defend it to the New York Times or somebody at a Barnes & Noble bookstore, or would I want to have my mother eat it, then shouldn't be doing it. Would it be something I'd want to, show really good friends of mine, some bad thing they were doing to some cattle or pigs? And I'm seeing these lame, heat-stressed cattle coming in that are too jacked up on beta agonists. That's not something I want to show anybody. Tongues hanging out and they don't want to walk. That's not okay. And some of these industry people, they live in their own little world. And they never get outside of that society. one of the things going out to Hollywood and all this kind of stuff, and all the universities I'm talking to now, we're dealing with a public that's getting very concerned about where the food comes from. We're also dealing with a public that just doesn't know anything. We're dealing with a public, I found out that 20% of families in South Denver don't even own a gerbil. In other words, they live in an animal-free world. So, things are getting they don't, they don't know how to build anything. They don't know how to do practical things. But I think that this FDA thing, I'll be talking about this talk, they start this boundary stuff. Yeah, you want to do that on food safety too? Well, the FDA will get you for that. Okay?
What they do with that issue, Temple, is you have to define the scope of the audit, which is what you're saying is boundaries. What are you looking at? What are you not looking at? However, what we're working on in the trade group is the flip side, which is your argument, which is a good Samaritan rule protecting public health is regardless scope of audit or not.
Well, what if somebody was going to the bathroom in the middle of the melon conveyor?
Whether it's on an audit,
That's not on an audit tool.
that's right. What is our obligation to report? And I use a more practical kind of example of if you saw somebody beating up a child,
Yep.
you wouldn't say that's not on the audit tool. You would go do something. You have an obligation to go do something about it. But so what we're trying to do is raise awareness in the auditing company world that you can't always say it's out of scope.
Well, that's the thing. And then you got these rotten places that sue an auditing company. And earlier I talked about that. This plant was the garbage dump of the century. And they sued an auditing company. They were delisted. About some minutia of wording in the AMI guideline. We had to go back and find all the old audit forms and everything. It all had to do with wording. This plant was a dump. And then sometimes, in some ways, the auditing company gets stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I look at things and I'm thinking, well, okay, I was there at the Emmys and talking to people there, and can I defend everything that we're doing? I think that's what we got to be looking at. And the industry needs to get out of their cave. And there are certain people in the industry that they're in a cave. I mean, look at this latest egg mess. And then, okay, let's say, like I know there was another thing with hens where the auditing company just was supposed to audit the pack-off area. They knew the inside where the hens were, it was a mess. Well, that got torn apart in the press. Okay, so now we're getting into the boundaries of the audit. It's a real mess. You see, then you get into what they consider auditor ethics, like who owns the audit. And okay, the press calls me up. Let's say I was the auditor, and I just gave them a grade A on the egg pack-off. And I knew the hens were like a crap hole. According to auditor ethics, that way they're teaching it now, that's totally confidential information. Is there a point where, you see, with food safety, there's a bigger issue here than there is the animal welfare. I mean, you could become an accessory to a criminal negligence.
Okay, we have one more question here.
I think it's out of the topic. It's just, what do you think about the Kobe meat?
The what?
Kobe meat from
Kobe
Japan. Kobe meat from Japan.
Oh,
Kobe meat.
Kobe meat. What do I think about Kobe meat? Well, I've seen them get cattle so heavy they had difficulty walking. And I definitely have got problems with that. This brings up another thing in welfare that I'm getting very concerned about, what I call biological system overload. We're pushing that dairy cow to put out more and more milk. She's getting skinnier and skinnier. She won't breed back. The lameness has gotten worse. The dairy cow doesn't have enough fat pads in her feet to keep her from getting lame. Pigs, bigger and bigger and bigger, pushing them with beta agonists, push them with just genetics. And I've seen market hogs from certain farms where 50% of the young hogs were lame. Score 3s and 4 lame on the lameness scoring system. That's not okay. Beef cattle still living outside, but now we're getting into some pushing beef cattle too hard. And there's a point where they're falling apart. Broilers had terrible problems with legs, and they've actually corrected some of that now. The broilers are a bit better, but then there were these hideous turkeys that were popping tendons, and it was going necrotic. That certainly wouldn't be very nice for the welfare of the turkey.
Temple, 2 questions. Obviously, you have a problem with beta agonists, and I don't disagree. Are there any good beta agonists, and if they're not, how do we get rid of them?
Well, there are some groups of animals that I've seen beta agonists used on where the animals were okay. And one way to deal with it is a strict outcome thing. You can measure lameness. You can measure heat stress. The thing that's weird in beef and beta agonists, and I've seen this in 4 or 5 different places now, is if you have 100 cattle, there'll be 4 or 5 or 6 cattle really, really, really messed up, where they're really lame, tongues hanging out, heat stress. Then you'll have another 20 or 30% that are sore-footed, and they act like the stockyard's got a red-hot floor, because they'll walk tippy-toes, and they act like the truck ramps are red-hot, and walk tippy-toe, and then the rest of the cattle are okay. Why are you getting that variability? Is it not mixed in with the feed right? Do those cattle bigger pigs and they eat more feed? I don't know. But then I did see one group of cattle I know that had been on zilpaterol, and they looked like bulls, but other than that, they were fine. Couldn't find anything wrong with them. So from a welfare standpoint, again, measure the outcome, which would be the lameness, and I better not see open mouth breathing, because Terry Mader's got a paper in the Journal of Animal Science, open mouth breathing in cattle is severe heat stress. I can measure open mouth breathing. I can train any dingaling to measure that. Their mouths are either open or they're not. You know, that's easy thing to measure. You know, so strictly from a welfare standpoint, I could do it with outcome. But let's look at meat quality. There's a zillion journal articles that says it makes meat tough. I don't know why we cut the testicles off a bull, and then we spend $20 to feed it something that gives it a crest and a big fat neck like a bull. That doesn't make very much sense to me. Why don't we just leave the testicles on? And you wouldn't have the lameness. It'd probably grow just as much. Why don't we just grow Chianina cattle? A lot of you here, we went through the Chianina fads back in the 70s. Well, we can grow cattle really fast and just grow Chianinas. You need to get them in black now. But they're not going to pass on any grading thing.
Another question. Autism. You spent a lot of time working in the autistic group. What do you feel there are more kids today that are autistic than there were 30, 40 years ago, and do you have any feelings why?
Well, you see, they've changed some of the diagnostic criteria. When in the early 90s they came out with Asperger's, which is simply a mild form of autism where there's no speech delay. Well, there are lots of people around with Asperger's. They're coming out of the woodwork now as their grandkids and their kids are getting diagnosed. So some of the increase is the increase in Asperger kids. And some of the Asperger kids are having more problems today getting jobs because, you know, the paper routes are all gone. All the Aspergers in my generation, those kids were on paper routes and they had to learn how to do, you know, various things. I think there is some severe autism that's gone up, and especially as regressive autism where they have speech and then they lose it. Another thing is that many medications that people are on now very bad for the fetus. You know, a drug like Prozac or any of the other antidepressant medications I've been on antidepressants for years, and these are medications that for teenagers and adults can be very valuable drugs, but they're real bad for the fetus. Because if you're pregnant and you take Prozac, normally it makes your serotonin get increased. Well, what happens if you're pregnant and you take it, the nervous system's growing in the fetus that goes, oh, I don't need to grow all those serotonin nerves because there's plenty of serotonin out there, and then there's been a slight increase in autism associated with certain medications. Seizure drugs are severely teratogenic. So there's more stuff that people are getting exposed to in pregnancy. These plastic water bottles, that clear plastic, that's an endocrine disruptor. Probably not a good idea to drink out of those or feed your baby out of that. So I think there's some environmental contaminant things, but some of it on the real mild end is just increased diagnosis, because I know a plant where the plant engineer and the whole maintenance shop, I'm sure they're on the spectrum. And they learned enough social rules to where they survived 3 plant owners, and they're still there. And they do their social life out in the shop, and they don't even eat in the cafeteria. They got a picnic table in the shop they eat on.
Okay, and I'm sure people want to know how close to reality was the movie.
Well, Claire Danes sort of became me in the 60s and the 70s. That was sort of like going in a time machine. All the projects are accurate, like the gate, squeeze machine, the dip vat. My actual drawings were on the conference room table. The way that I think visually is accurately. All the autism is depicted really accurately. The main characters are all real. There are some things they had to change, and one of them was my thesis was on vocalization. The reason that had to be changed is because I had a giant fight with a professor on my thesis. He's still alive. So they couldn't depict that. So what they did is they took my work that I did on developing the audits, and they made that my thesis. You know, the mooing is correct. I've got 3 or 4 referee journal articles on vocal that involve the vocalization scoring. So they had to change that around. The song in graduation, when I did the carousel thing, that was actually high school graduation, and I spoke it rather than sung it. But the main things are all in character. The main characters are real. My science teacher and how he helped me, that's real. Anne, how she helped me out on the ranch, is real. And everything was in character. But, you know, they got to compress it into a short movie. I did have a blind roommate, and they moved her from graduate school to college. And the bull testicle thing actually happened. I did have the thing with the whole metal plate in the dip vat, that all happened. That was shown, and it killed the cattle, and that was accurately shown. You know, so it, you know, I thought they did a really, really good job. You know, but a 2-hour movie, they got to change a few things to make it work. And the Cowboys actually said they didn't want me there because their wives wouldn't want me be there. You know, and all the problems I had. Feed yards, the Fire and Ranchman magazine, I did write for them. You know, I met a lady that got me into the plant, and they couldn't call it Swift. They had to call it Abbott because it still existed. You see, one of the things they had to do when they were working on the scripts is I had to go through, like, what was still a real company. Scottsdale Feed Yard, we used the real name. It was torn down 25 years ago. We could use the real name there, but we couldn't use the name Swift because that still exists as a brand. So the Swift plant became the Abbott plant. And then the center track restrainer kind of got compressed back in time. You know, but things were, because I did that work in the 90s, but it's everything's in character, but all of the construction things I actually did. In fact, that animated center track restrainer drawing, that's actually an animated construction drawing from a real job. There's a big gear that goes around. That's the drawing a machine shop used to build the gear for every center track restrainer.
Okay, thank you very much, Temple.